Thank you all for coming out on this rainy, what day is it? Tuesday evening, yeah. Rainy Tuesday evening. It's a great pleasure and an honor to have this opportunity to introduce to you Lorna Goodison, the first woman to be the Poet Laureate of Jamaica, and until recently the Lemuel A. Johnson Professor of English and African and Afro-American Studies at the University of Michigan. She's mentioned, I think, yesterday that she's sort of always in Jamaica, but she still continues to spend a lot of time there. But she comes to us today from her home now in Half Moon Bay, British Columbia, where she lives with her husband, the pioneering scholar of West Indian poetry and indigenous studies, J. Edward Chamberlain. Lorna Goodison has received such major awards as the Commonwealth Poetry Prize, the Musgrave Gold Medal from the Institute of Jamaica, and she struck gold again recently, receiving the Queen's Gold Medal from the hands of the recently deceased Queen Elizabeth II. She received it before she was deceased, just to clarify. And also the Jamaican National Order of Distinction in the rank of Commander, the OCM Bocas Prize for Poetry, and the Wyndham Campbell Prize at Yale. And tomorrow she'll receive a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Furious Flower Poetry Center, directed by her own PhD student, Lauren Elaine. It's a major Black poetry conference and festival that will also feature our own Rita Dove. Lorna Goodison is a prolific poet, and recent years have seen the publication of her, sorry, should have had my prop ready, of the recent publication of her massive and beautiful collected poems, widely hailed as a major literary achievement. It was called Endlessly Moving and Rewarding: 4 Decades of Insight and Honesty, gathered in some 600 pages of rich, often fabular verse. Her poetry has been anthologized widely in many of the most respected poetry and literary collections, and she's also an acclaimed short story writer, essayist, and memoirist, and she's also the author of a prize-winning memoir as she says, the memoir of my mother and her island from Harvey River. Beautiful, beautiful memoir indeed. Her outstanding achievements meant that she's in very high demand, so we're really lucky to have her with us here tonight, given her many appearances in the Caribbean, the British Isles, across North America, and elsewhere. Rich and radiant in imagery, lush and incantatory in music, Goodison's poems journey into the recesses of her personal, familial, and historical past. They unflinchingly name and mourn the wounds of Caribbean history, enslavement, rape, torture, the breakup of families, yet celebrate the region's multiple peoples, cultures, religions, and languages, as embedded, for example, in its place names and even its flora. Her poetry's humane capaciousness enables her to traverse various historical and racial divides, recognizing the heroism of a leader of the anti-colonial resistance, such as Nanny, and yet also the daring of a colonial explorer, the torment of an enslaved Afro-Caribbean girl, and yet also the suffering of her patriarchally abused English tormentor. Open to the sensuous textures and rhetorical strategies of various forms of expression, her poetry also crosses genre lines. In its dialogue with other arts and discourses, it draws on the vividness of painting, and she is indeed a very accomplished painter, as you can see from the beautiful paintings of hers that, on the covers of her collections, and also at the same time on the cadences and sonorities of song, the incantations of prayer, and the legal quest for justice. even as the poetry also shows itself as poetry to have certain freedoms and capacities that may exceed those of any of these other genres. Goodison writes poetry of imaginative opulence while keeping the verbal fabric taut, tightly woven. She switches deftly, almost imperceptibly, among linguistic registers, Creole and Standard, Patois, Queen's English, and responds intimately to worlds seen and unseen. It's an honor to introduce a writer of such deep spiritual reserves and such seemingly boundless generosity. Please join me in warmly welcoming on her third visit to the University of Virginia, Lorna Goodison.
My great-grandmother was a Guinea woman. Wide eyes turning the corners of her face, could see behind her. Her cheeks dusted with a fine rash of jet bead warts that itched when the rain settled. My great-grandmother's waistline was the span of a headman's hand, slender and tall like a cane stalk, with a Guinea woman's antelope quick walk. And when she paused, her gaze would look to see her profile fine like some obverse impression on a Guinea coin from royal memory. Now it seems her fate was anchored in that unfathomable sea, for my great-grandmother caught the eye of a sailor whose ship sailed without him from Lucy Harbor. Great-grandmother's royal scent of cinnamon and scallions drew the sailor up the Straits of Africa, and the evidence is my blue-eyed grandmother, taken into Bacchus' household and covered with his name. And they forbade great-grandmother's Guinea woman presence. They washed away her scent of cinnamon and scallions. They controlled the child's antelope walk, and they called her uprisings rebellions. But great-grandmother, I see your features blood dark appearing in the children of each new breeding, and the high yellow brown is darkening down. And listen, my children, it's your great-grandmother's turn. Good evening. I am so very honored to be here with you. Thank you very much. Thank you. After the green gown of my mother gone down, August, her large heart slowed down and then stops. Fall now and trees flame, catch a fire and riot. Last leaves in scarlet and gold fever burning. Remember when you heard Bob Marley hymn Redemption song, and from his tone and timbre you sensed him traveling? He had sent the band home and he was just keeping himself company, cooling star. Sad rude boy fretting on a cowboy box guitar in a studio with stray echo and wailing sound, lost singing, scatting through the door of no return. When the green goes, beloved, the secret is opened, and the breath will fall still and the life covenant broken. Dress my mother's cold body in a deep green gown, catch a fire and let fall and flame time come after the green gown of my mother gone down. We laid her down full of days, chant Grail from the book of life, and summon her kin from the long-lived line of David and Margaret. Come Claredine, Alberta, Flavius, Edmund, Howard and Rose, Marcus her husband, gone before, come and walk dear Doris home. And the blue mountains will open to her to seal her corporeal self in. From the ancient vault that is their lapis lazuli heart, the headwaters of all our rivers spring. Headwaters, wash away the embalmer's myrrh resin, the dredging of white powder caking her cold limbs. Return her ripe body clean to fallow the earth. For her eyes to become brown agate stones. From her forehead may there dawn bright mornings. May her white hair contribute to the massing of clouds. Cause the blood settled in her palms to sink into fish-filled lagoons. Earth, she was a mother like you who birthed and nursed her children. Look, cherubims and angels, see her name written down in the index of the faithful in the mother of pearl book of saints. Mama, Aunt Anne says she saw Aunt Rose come out of an orchard red with ripe fruit. and call out laughing to you, and that you scaled the walls like two young girls and scampered barefoot among the lush fruit groves. My mother's sea shanty. I dream I'm washing my mother's body in the night sea, and that she sings slow and that she still breathes. I see my plump mother, a plump mermaid in my dreams. I wash her white hair with ambergris and foaming seaweed. I watch my mother underwater, gather the loose pearls she finds and scrub them free from nacre and string them on a lost fishing line. I hear my dark mother speaking sea speak with pilot fish, and she's showing them how to direct barks that bear away our grief and anguish. And I pray my mother breaks free from her fish pots and marine chores, of her residence beneath the sea, and that she rides a wild white horse. Speaking of mermaids on the sea, I'm becoming a mermaid. Watching the underlife idle by, you think drowning must be easy death. Just let go and let the water carry you away and under. The current pulls your bathing plats loose. Your hair floats out straightened by the water. Your legs close together, fuse the length down. Your feet now one broad foot, and toes spread into a fishtail fan-like. Your sex locked under mother of pearl scales. You are Nixie now, a mermaid. A green-tinged, fish-fleshed woman thing who swims with thrashing movements, stands upended on the sea's floor, breasts full and floating, buoyed by the salt, and the space between your arms now always filled, and your sex sealed forever on the mother of pearl scale locks, closes finally on itself like some closed-mouthed oyster. Reporting back to Queen Isabella. When Don Cristobal returned to a hero's welcome, his caravels corked with treasures of the New World, he presented his findings, told of his great adventures to Queen Isabella, whose speech set the standard for her nation's language. When he came to Examaica, he described it so, the fairest isle that eyes ever beheld. And then he balled up a big sheet of parchment, unclenched, and let it fall off the flat surface before it landed at her feet. There we were, massifs, high mountain ranges, expansive plains, deep valleys, one he'd christened for the Queen of Spain, overabundance of wood, over 100 rivers, food and fat pastures for Spanish horses, men and cattle, and yes, Your Majesty, there were some people. I try not to talk too much when I read, but I just say a little bit that these two poems are about art and whether we could call what enslaved people produce art. The first one is called Passing the Grace Vessels of Calabash. Passing the grace vessels of Calabash are four parents carved on, lest they forget, maps, totems, symbols, and secret names, creating art which when some would claim we existed in beast state. Every Negro in slavery days had their own hand-engraved calabash, and so they drink water from grace vessels, their lips kissing lines of maps leading back to Africa, to villages where relatives waited for years before they destroyed the cooking pots of the ones who crossed. So who was the mother of Jamaican art? She was the first nameless woman who created images of her children sold away from her. She suspended those good babies from a rope around her neck, and before she ate, she fed them touch bits of pounded yam and plantains to seal lips. And she always urged them to sip water. She carved them of heartwood. Teeth and nails were her first tools. Later, she wielded a blunt blade. Her spit cleaned face and limbs, and the pitch oil of her skin burnished. When the woodworms bored into their bellies, she warmed castor oil and they purged. She learned her art by breaking hard rock stones, and she did not sign her work. October in the kingdom of the poor. October, month for rainy weather. The evening sky above thick and purple, at its heart hidden, a white and watery moon. And I wonder, is a 6 o'clock stay everywhere, like in that place in Africa where I come from as a child? Where Master come from, is so it say too? And one man say that I wonder too much. I wonder about things that have no answer. But sometimes when I'm standing wondering under an October sky, purple, like the royal robes of King Solomon, a taffeta rain street, lavender purple sky, like the white skirts of Queen Elizabeth's dress, sprinkled with stars, silver and space so that you can count them. Sometimes, if I stand quite still, the sky just drapes itself around my shoulders, and I stand robed, royal in the kingdom of the poor. And then the stars just come and encircle my head in a gracious diadem. Okay, I was told I had to read this. Annie Pengele. I come to represent the case of one Annie Pengele, maidservant, late at the St. Fleming estate, situated in the westerly parish of Hanover, where the massive mountain range assumes the shape of a dolphin's head, rearing up in the blue expanse overhead, restless white clouds round it foaming. Those at sea would look up and behold, mirrored in the seascape, a sky. It is this need to recreate, to run against things that cause all this confusion. The same need that made men leave from one side of the world to journey in long-mouthed ships to drove millions of souls to a world that they call the new one. In competition with the original act, the creation of the old one. But now you're telling me to proceed, right? Proceed and proceed swiftly. Why have I come here representing Annie? Well, this is the first thing she asked me to see. But Annie is not even a real name. A name is the first thing we own in this world. We lay claim to a group of sounds which rise up and down and mark our space in the air around us. We become owners of a harmony of vowels and consonants, singing a specific meaning. Her real name was given to her at the pastoral ceremony of her outdooring, and its outer meaning is she who is precious to us. It had to a hidden meaning, a kept secret, a meaning known only to those within the circle of her family. For sale with a man, one small African girl, answered now to the name of Annie. Oh, Mrs. My dear, when you write to Lady Nugent to tell her of your splendid birthday, of the ivory moire gown you wore that you sent Claire to London for, you can tell her too, how you had built for you a pair of soft, supple leather riding boots, fashioned from your own last by George O'Brien Wilson, late of Aberdeen, now shoemaker and saddler of Lucy Hanover, late occupation broke sailor. One pair of tortoise shell combs, one scrolled silverback mirror, one dinner party where they killed one whole cow with oaken casks of Madeira wine to wash it down, and don't forget, one small African girl answering now to the name of Annie. Well, With all that worthless show of affection, Master never sleep with Mrs. But I am not here to tell you about that, for that is Bacchus' business. I am really here representing Annie. For Mrs. began to make Annie sleep across her feet come December, when northers began to blow. Northers being the chill wheeling tail then of the winter breezes, dropping off their cold what left in Jamaica to confuse the transplanted planters, causing them to remember words like hoarfrost and moors from a frozen vocabulary they no longer had need for. Well, when this fall's winter breeze would careen across cane fields, Mrs. would make Annie lie draped, heaped across her feet, a human blanket, nothing to cover her as she gave her warmth to Mrs. So I have come to say that history owes Annie a bright woolen blanket. She's owed to at least 12 years of sleep stretched out, free to assume the stages of sleep, flat on her back, or profiled like the characters in an Egyptian frieze. Most nights though, Mrs. don't sleep, and as Annie was subject to Mrs.'s will, Annie was not to sleep as long as Mrs. kept her open-eyed vigil. Sometimes Mrs. would sit up, sipping wine from a cut glass goblet, talking. Sometimes Mrs. would dance and sing like she was on a stage, sad cantatrice on a stage performing. And at the end of her performance, she would demand that Annie clap and shout encore. And encouraged by this, she would sing and dance on her half-praised song of rejection. Well, sometimes Annie would nod off. Mrs. Juka with a pearl toothpick. Sometimes Annie tumble off the chair, fall by asleep. Mrs. slap her awake again. And then in order to keep her alert, awake, she devised a paper torture. One pair of newspapers, a sharp pair of scissors later, and Annie learned about the cruel make-work task that is to cut up to throw away a whole newspaper. For if Mrs. couldn't sleep, Annie girl, you don't sleep that night. And poor Mrs. enslaved by love, fighting her servitude with spite. And so I say that history owes Annie thousands of nights of sleep upon a feather bed, soft feathers, from the breast of a free-soaring bird, one bright blanket, and her name returned. She who is precious to us. And in Bengalio, I say that history owes you. La Casa dos Dorados. It's a set of poems I wrote while I was in Spain some years ago. And I was passing by a shop and saw this lovely little figure of a carved figure of a black lady sitting in the window. She had no clothes on except her shoes were painted on her. And she never had a chemise on. Anyway, this is called La Casa dos Dorados. The shop of saintly relics, you called it, where she was on display in her painted-on underwear. And the clerk dissembled when pressed to identify, icon of a black woman, 1 rule and a half high, limbs hinged, so she sat upright on a ladder-back chair, knees together, feet sheathed in ankle boots, straight-laced, sweet-faced, embarrassed to be seen not properly dressed, in a window in the Alfama district. You insist you need to know who she really is. You wait till the owner is summoned, and his best guess is she's Our Lady of Montserrat, Black Madonna. Well, what could have brought her to this? Why has she stripped off all her clothes to expose her thin white tempera, chemise, and bloomers? Our Lady's home is on a Barcelona mountain. Attempts to bring her to the plains failed. Believers make pilgrimage to her shrine of miracles, but she's come down to us this day. For you're in the valley of the shadow, the dark. Dark Lady has come to accompany you through this place on the path where consolations withdraw. Do like her. Sit still. Yield up all outer. Mother Muse, keep doing the island's housekeeping. Scour and rinse out the mouth of a river, plastic scandal bag clogged. You're a pin-up girl in a one-piece bathing suit. I saw you sew yourself. It is ruched and tucked like a washboard across your belly. Your wet let-out hair cascades down your back. You dive in and breaststroke the familiar long lap river rushing past your old childhood home, now all but gone to ruin, captured by a pirate cousin. You backstroke, float, and butterfly into Lucy Harbor, where I left you in the Bardo days after death. I clung to your capable hand, losing warmth, as we traveled to the western shore. You stepped into the deep and embraced big sea waves, turned back to me on land and said, "You cannot come with me yet." Then off you swam. I set out for home, feet barely touching ground, till I reached Constant Spring, where I lifted up my eyes to the hills. Go along, you said. I'll be Muse, and you be yourself. This book of my Mother Muse mainly poems about a musician called Don Drummer, a trombonist, and his lover Margarita Mafood, whom he murdered, and a woman called Sister Mary Ignatius, aka Sister Iggy, who taught boys at the Alpha Boys School. A lot of great musicians were taught by her at school. And yes, it's called Mother Muse. And this is about the first time, maybe, Margarita Mafood and Don Drummond saw each other. Who knows where or when? When or where, time or date they first met. Romantics believe that it happened one night as he performed with his Catalites on stage, and she stood there in the wings in waiting. He sighted her up when he paused, so Dizzy Moore the trumpeter could solo. Don lowered his trombone and caught sight of her, standing still in the wings, cool as a marble statue. Waiting in the wings, she'd always go quiet, none around her able to coax response from her, save silence. She'd look skyward, slow her heartbeat to near stop, and let the spotlight mark her place, allow the music to build suspense, made the audience wait, until she was released from standstill into life again. He saw her at resurrection moment. A stone nymph who broke free before his gaze from the calm state, and with a whirlpool froth of skirts soaring into his melancholy life, she entered aiming for the light. I just end as I began with two elegies. I began with one elegy. Threnody, so my sister Barbara. Mama got light cakes shaped like small shells from her cousin Madeline, who turned her hand to baking these delicacies laced with honey and lemon. She served them on a side plate set down by a vase, masked with marigolds, on her old dining table, spread with a cream damask tablecloth from better days. Porta-Pruno wine aglow in our last 2 unchipped wine glasses. A sweet mouth repast for the day you brought him to meet us. This is Jean. He is from Port-au-Prince, Haiti. His name must be pronounced Ja. In order to sound it right, you must glide it over the back teeth, then express it out of a half-open mouth. Jean is journalist, on assignment to the Star newspaper, where you were star reporter. And when you left for the evening shift, I stood on a carton box and peeped from the upstairs window to see Jean pause at the gate, light a cigarette, pull in and release a smoke ring, then a smoke veil, sheer as illusion tool. He draped one arm like love's banner across your shoulders. There was talk of marriage and you making a home in Haiti. Then came shock bulletins of Papa Doc, Tonton Macoute. And did Jean flee to France, where he and his Creole parents owned a pied à terre in Paris, or was it a chateau en Provence? No more Jean. Time passed and you loved again, but now you're traveling. Will you want to stop over in France? If you do, get a dainty honey and lemon cake, and that might bring you back to Jean at the gate. Smoke ring and smoke veil you will pass through. Oh, monsieur, my sister, pass through. Trinity for my brother, Nigel. He was a student activist at Michigan State University in the 1970s. He was an athlete, football player. Slow jog toward the shade trees of far pavilions. You run on vapors from the roar of crowds when you scored goals on soccer fields those game days. On your move, past stands where you exhorted the crowd, get up, stand up, and rally around your own black brothers. Mark the spot where they refused. And you wonder if this journey homeward will take you through East Lansing. For you always hope to see her again. She would skin the shade of sweet tea, nursed on a sugar tit soaked in lightning and moonshine that gave her the habit. Magnetic, she fixed her lips to your mouth, then to your throat to drink of your youth. Step in time past the bandstand, where a brass marching band on game days played pump it up songs. Recall an old rumba joke, Edmundo Rumba and his Ross band. Here come the Temptations to replace cornet, kettle drum, tuba, and trombone. Now for you, David Ruffin appears to perform at high-low, tempting Temptations walk. All play now on pause. Stadiums in the Big Ten fall silence as you raise a clenched fist and you exit. Within the blow of peace be the azure of calm. Beat soft now, bright hearts, beat soft and sound calm. By the cobalt of love deep and the indigo of perception, by waters of sky blue and meads incantation, be measured, blue measured in verdant balance of green. Hearts be rock calm now, light we have seen. By meditations of clear waters, ye all striving cease. Within the world illumination forever, lasting in peace. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Lorna, for that very moving, beautiful reading. Are you willing still to take some questions? Maybe first let me mention a couple of things which I didn't mention at the top while Lorna moves from reading poetry mode to dialogic mode. First, I wanted to thank Zarif, the Assistant Director of Poetry and Poetics, for helping me set this up. I also want to thank the UVA bookstore for allowing us to use this wonderful space and for ordering Lorna Goodison's books. which Lorna is going to be, I think, happy to sign if you're interested. And they've told me that there are no cash sales, but other cards will work. So long as there's something to back them up with. But anyway, so then she has an array of books from the selected to the collected and the more recent work. But with that, Lorna, why don't we open things to the floor and see if there are any questions or comments from anyone for Lorna Goodison. Well, we're still waiting for a question for Lorna Goodison. Professor Rohde.
Yeah. Hello, hi Lorna, thank you so much. I just wonder if you're willing to talk about the writing of elegy. What is the writing of elegy like for you? How do you think about it? And what's its place in your book?
So the question's about the writing of elegy.
What's it like to write it?
Yeah.
Well, the two last ones I read I lost 2 siblings in 2 years. And I had to do something. So those are poems of sheer necessity. I had to put that stuff somewhere, you know. But the first one about my sister and her early boyfriend, I kind of felt guilty about it because like she got married to somebody and she had a whole life with this other person. But for some crazy reason, I think it has to do with being what I do. I just never forgot this guy, you know. And I'm hoping she doesn't know that I did this or something, because she probably want me to write about her and her husband. But I did, I saw, and I remember blowing the smoke, and it just seemed, the images seemed right for an elegy. The smoke ring and passing through the veil, and it kind of prepared, it kind of wrote itself in a way for me. So I couldn't write that when she was alive, so, you know, anyway. I don't even know. That's just how it presented itself, you know. But like the elegies from my mother, I remember my mother died in August, and then I had to go back to Michigan right after that. And I was in Michigan. Nobody there knows my family. I had no family there. I had nobody. It was terrible. And that poem, it's a sheer, I had to make something out of all my grief, you know. So I think very often that's what elegies, where the place where, wouldn't you say that's where they come from? You know, if you can't carry that kind of grief and pain and mourning. And grief is my brother died just a few months ago, and it was just horrible. I just didn't think I was going to be able to make it through that one, because he was my youngest son. Anyway, but grief just has its own way with you. It just does whatever it wants to do with you. Don't you find? You're just walking along and then it just sort of strikes you down in the street or something. So it was some attempt to control these waves of just sheer pain that were just overwhelming me at the loss of my brother, you know. So yeah, it's just it's your fight back. You have to do something. You can't just stay there and make it kill you off. And that's a very poor answer about about writing languages. Also, too, it's a way of just remembering. I remember my brother when he was a beautiful, strong athlete. And there's a one. I tell you a little bit. His name was Nigel Goodison, and he was a brilliant football player. He was recruited from Jamaica to play at Michigan State, and he was. I mean, people still talk about him scoring a goal from the half line, and he was a great, you know, anyway. But his life ended very tragically in many ways. But he became a student activist because he wanted better conditions for athletes at Michigan State. And so he threw all himself into that, and it didn't work out well for him. But I just kind of thought I wanted people to know that he did this. So that's part of what happened in the elegy as well. There's a picture online of him standing up, sort of with his fist up in the middle of a crowd, urging people. He was that kind of guy. Yeah.
Sorry. I had a question. When we talk about things like Caribbean poetry or Jamaican or even Jamaican poetry, I was curious, for you, do those fields have, when you think of that, specific stylistic or defining features, or for you are those fields too diverse to kind of be defined or pinned down?
Well, because my foundation is so much, like when I went to primary school, which is like 8-7, you had to memorize lots of poetry, usually the romantic poets. I can do some for you right now, but I really wouldn't go. But I knew, I just memorized a lot, and it's a good thing to do. I memorize a lot of poetry. So I think the foundation of maybe a lot of Caribbean poetry, people of my age, is definitely that, from the great canon, But you can't help but be influenced by what your actual lived life, your lived experience. And that, that is everything from street cries, people selling stuff on the street, to, to the music, to things my mother had all these stories from the country which found their way to my work. And, just your own voice, you kind of build on that, And also, I went to the kind of schools where every morning you had to sing a hymn. And a lot of those hymns were terrific hymns. We were talking about Reverend George Herbert. We had to sing hymns written by George Herbert and John Keble and John Milton. And, So, you have all of that feeding into that voice. So I think that is the basis, that's the foundation of a lot of voices of Caribbean poetry.
Maybe I'll follow up the question about elegies. You were talking about personal elegies. What about poems of historical grief, remembering, children sold away from their mothers in enslavement, and, the torture that you talk about, that kind of historical grief?
Well, I happen to have been born on the 1st of August, which is Emancipation Day. So I kind of took that quite seriously at some point. I thought, I have to do something about the fact, why was I born? My mother swears I wouldn't do. She said I was supposed to be born before that, and I just wouldn't come up until the Emancipation Day. So I take that seriously. But if you are thinking, feeling human being at all, and you learn about our history, you can't help but think about those things. And I understand from somebody who's a historian, Tekla McFetty, that, and I never saw that. I always said that I do history from below. And he said that there's evidence that enslaved women. Well, okay, let me just go back and say, I always say that you usually have to respond to ill treatment somehow. Even if you can't make a full-scale defense of yourself, you make a gesture. And we're great at gestures, when Jamaicans kiss their teeth or something, you have to do something. It's not true, you have to do something. And I'm always blown away by the gestures where people respond to the thing that says, I am a human being. And these women who would have their children sold away from them, you have a child and one day somebody says, well, good, that was nice, and this is gone. And your families, and you split up, all those things. And apparently what some women would do is that they would make these little carvings that represented the babies. And they would hang this carving from a rope around the neck. And before they ate, they would kind of symbolically offer the baby something to eat, or a little water to drink, And well, when I heard that, I was just, I couldn't, it was, yeah. So that's how that poem came about. And because I trained as a painter, a lot of what I do, my response is find a way through sort of art practice, I was telling to some of you that I am very much taken with the idea of a writer or poet as a maker. You make something. just like those women made that baby, I have to make a poem that says this happened, you know. So does that? Yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to mess up your beautiful line, but the poem about the girl called Annie and thinking about what history owes her, right? Yeah. I was really interested in why history in that poem. I feel like so many people owe, and so many institutions owe her, right? Why history in that poem?
Some people know. I told them in. I wrote that poem at the end. In the end, she being owed by the lady who treated her and her husband, and the poem just wouldn't move. It just stayed there, and I knew it wasn't right. It took me a year to arrive at that ending. Because I had to get to the point where I realized that her abuser was just as enslaved as she was, maybe in a better condition. But she, they always say that people in prison, the guard is in prison too, So as awful as the whole, this is one of my mother's stories. Apparently the story is based in fact, it's true. That there was this woman who used to make this little girl sleep across her feet and walk. And that, our history is just full of stories like that. So I don't know, that's how it came out. That is, I don't think there would have been much point in us sort of saying, Mrs. should just appear or something. I don't think so. So that's how it came out. I hope. It might not be, that's it.
So apologies, it's kind of a multi-segmented question, but I'm really drawn to these moments in your practice where you sort of bring in these other sort of mediums in this sort of poetic space. Like there's sort of like this kind of sculptural carving that sort of happens in Who's the Mother Jamaican Heart, or sort of the visual energy of painting in something like Hungry Belly Kill Daily. And I'm kind of wondering what your approach is to sort of these intermedial turns when it comes to your poetics. Do you feel like the stakes are different for a poem that doesn't engage these other mediums versus something that's interested in sort of bringing in sort of these other sort of practices, these other mediums into sort of the poem themselves?
That's a very interesting question. I never thought about that. There are some paintings, some poems that are just paintings. I began as a painter who occasionally wrote poems. And then I began to do almost equally, I would sort of write. I once had a show where I had paintings accompanied by poems. And then one day the paintings just kind of went off in a huff. No, really, it's like they said, well, you're not paying us any attention anymore. And they left. I didn't paint for years and years and years and years. So what you see there is my painting with the words, because the actual painting wasn't happening anymore. So it wasn't anything more deep than that. It was just, and I felt really sad that I wasn't painting. I love painting. I love walking into a studio and smelling oil paints, and it just makes me happy. But I'd take myself out of that world, and I wasn't doing it anymore. So I don't think there's anything more complex than that.
I have one. Last one, sorry. Is there a poem that really strikes you in your memory as you wrote it, that you felt like it gave you something that you maybe never experienced before, and you're just like, that's one that I really felt? Or maybe there's a few, but it's really vague and just more of an experiential, fun question, I hope. But that's more of what I'm asking.
Yeah, I have a set of poems called Hearties, and I've never had anything quite like that before, And I'd be driving along the street, and I'd have to stop because it really was writing me more than I was writing it. And it was really quite, intense. But they don't come like that very often. I've never had that happen to me at quite that level of intensity. So those ones I will always remember.
Which take one last question. Please, in the back.
Are there any lessons that life is teaching you right now? Would you maybe share?
About writing? The writing of poetry? Or just life in general? Huh?
However you want to take it.
I don't know. I think, I'm in the present in a room with some great writers and poets, You're very fortunate to have Professor Jahan Ramzan in your midst. I refer to him once as poetry's best friend. And no, really, he is poetry's best friend because he does for us what we can't do for ourselves, in that you'd see people nodding. I don't want to say no more. And then, the great Rita Duff, who is just a gift to the world, Yes, it's the great Camille Dunn. So you're in a room with people who are doing, I think, somebody once told me, I'm sure somebody really wise said this along, that poetry was given to us to help to make our lives easier. And we should take advantage of it. It's not, I used to teach a course at Michigan, 240 Introduction to Poetry. And, people would come in and they say, so how do you feel about this poetry? And they say, oh, poetry sucks. They tell you that poetry sucks. And I figured after a while, it had to do with being the way you're taught. If people tell you that, you're presenting it to you like it's some real, like it's a plot, a papist plot to make you look foolish. Seriously, any teaching like that, I don't think is right. Poetry is not a papist plot to make you look stupid. And like, you got the wrong answer. It's not that. It is somehow something that can ease your heart or unknot something in you that if you don't unknot it, it will choke you or something. It's not just a prescriptive thing. It's just something, it puts you in touch with some part of you that very few or if anything else can put you in touch with. What did you say that, Rita? Yeah. So I don't know, if you can have some sort of relationship with it, it will, like I said, it's given to you to help to make your life easier. And just, they always tell you that when you find out you get a poem, I'm not telling you, I'm just saying that when you're presented with a poem, you just read it all the way through. Don't stop, just go all the way from beginning to end. And I think it was Auden who said, the poem works on you kind of like how it's a meat that a burglar brings to distract the dog. I always love that. Because while you're there, it just distracts you, so the poem can't enter into you. So I'm saying, don't tell people you're doing these things, so they will think you're weird. But if you want to have a relationship with poetry, just treat it like that. Treat it as something that will slip, if you give it a chance, it will work its way into you and help. It can only help you. It can only give you good things. Well, good poems, poems. Yeah, you have to qualify that. Some and I'm not sure that's what I need to tell you, but if I think of it before I leave here, I will tell you.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming out. Wonderful to have you here again. Our distinguished guest is happy to sign books if you like, and enjoy the rest of your evenings. Thank you so much.